All right. We are live for another day. We of question period, House of Commons, Parliament, all of that fun stuff. Over the weekend, Mar-a-Lago, in a stunning showcase of hypocrisy and low-frequency thinking, climate change bedwetter Justin Trudeau arrives to his meeting with Donald Trump via a presidential-sized motorcade of gas-guzzling SUVs. Let's take a look at this video.
Don't you know I'm loco?
If we take a look here, a massive motorcade here. Just giant SUVs. Trudeau at his finest, putting a quote-unquote price on pollution and forcing Canadians to pay for it while he flies all around the world in his massive jumbo jet, and then shows up and is going to Mar-a-Lago in a motorcade of easily 10 plus SUVs. Ridiculous. Absolute hypocrite. And not only is he a hypocrite, he continues to make Canada look incredibly bad. Canadian PM Justin Trudeau meeting with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Justin Trudeau was caught on camera mocking Trump behind his back. This man is invited out to his personal house, his compound in Mar-a-Lago. He goes there. Not only does he show up late, he sits there, acts fake, takes a picture with Trump, and then talks shit about him behind his back. Now, whatever you think about Trump, I don't care. That's your own personal thought, your own personal opinion. This man is the leader of our country, supposed to be doing international deals and healing the U.S. relations between us right now. But instead, he is caught on camera talking shit about him.
Now, in a huddle alongside Princess Anne and Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau and Emmanuel Macron were caught discussing a 40-minute press conference. President Trump was not mentioned by name, but he had held a lengthy press conference with Mr. Macron earlier that day. The leaders are in London for NATO meetings.
Anyway, the point being, Trudeau continues to make us look terrible, and he gets invited out to Mar-a-Lago. He gets invited out to go with Trump. Like I said, putting this tax on Canadians to fight quote-unquote climate change. He flies his massive jumbo jet wherever he pleases. Tons and tons of jet fuel. Just for him. And maybe one or two other people. Shows up, goes to Mar-a-Lago in a massive motorcade of SUVs. This man is the biggest hypocrite of all time. And it's really no shock, right? He continues to expose himself further and further. Whenever he opens his mouth, whenever he goes to a press conference, whenever he gets on a world stage, he's just an idiot. He's just a flat-out idiot. We have a border security press conference, or talking with reporters here. Pierre Poilievre, I'm very curious to see what he has to say. Let's take a look. I will be skipping through the French parts.
Bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'être là. Après 9 ans de Justin Trudeau,
And of course it starts off with French. Okay.
sécurité et l'Union le 24, le patrouille français notre à la 2 terrains, donc annulant pour promesse du Canada. After 9 of Justin Trudeau.
All right, here we go.
Everything is broken. Work doesn't pay. Housing costs have doubled, rising faster than in any other G7 country, to the point where 80% of Canadians now, for the first time ever, believe home ownership is just for the very rich. Vancouver and Toronto are now among the most expensive housing markets in the world. We have 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario alone, 35 in Halifax. Food prices have risen 37% faster in the United States than they have in Canada, a gap that has appeared and widened with the application of the carbon tax on the farmers who grow our food and the truckers who ship our food. A tax that Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberals now want to quadruple to 61 cents a litre, which would not only starve our people and kill our jobs, but would grind our economy to a halt. We know that President Trump would be calling all of our businesses, welcoming them to leave Canada and go south of the border where there is no carbon tax and where other taxes are dropping. It would be a gigantic sucking sound of Canadian jobs, businesses, and money heading south that would add to the already $500 billion of net outflow of investment from Canada to the U.S. that has happened since Justin Trudeau took office 9 years ago. After 9 years of Trudeau, we've gone from having equal median income. Canadian and American workers made the same amount of money 10 years ago, to income per person now $22,000 higher in the United States than it is here in Canada, after 9 years of high taxes, more bureaucracy, and doubling of our national debt. And then there is the broken immigration, broken budget, and broken border. Justin Trudeau is a weak leader who has lost control of spending, lost control of immigration, and lost control of our border. And don't take my word for it. Look at the facts. His own government admits there are as many as 500,000 people in Canada illegally. We know that seizures of fentanyl doses by U.S. Border Patrol at U.S.-Canada border have more than tripled between last year and this year. In the 12 months to September 2024, 11,600 pounds of drugs have been seized by U.S. Border Patrol agents at the Canada-U.S. border. In 2024, U.S. border guards caught 10 times more people sneaking southward from Canada than in 2022. This is a problem that we expect will only get worse because we have 700,000 international students here now that Trudeau and his former immigration minister, Sean Fraser, hinted that they would be able to stay permanently. And now suddenly that message has reversed, and Trudeau and the NDP Liberal government say that their plan is to hope, with the honour system, that they will leave voluntarily.
The honor system.
And then there's the drugs.
What a joke.
I'm quoting now from a document obtained by Access to Information by Blacklock's reporter. This is a briefing note the Prime Minister received almost a year ago. CSIS identifies more than 350 organized crime groups actively involved in the domestic illegal fentanyl market. And what has Trudeau done since he got this information back in January, almost a year ago? Absolutely nothing, other than try to legalize and liberalize these same drugs. He has weakened our borders, and he doesn't even inspect 99% of shipping containers that come into our country. Since Trudeau became Prime Minister, there's been a 632% increase in U.S. border control encounters with people illegally attempting to enter the United States from Canada. In the first 10 months of 2024 alone, U.S. Border Patrol has intercepted more than 21,000 people illegally crossing our border. And on top of that, doesn't include the dangers that are coming into Canada from the United States because of Trudeau's broken border. According to Toronto police, 82% of gun crime is done with American guns that Trudeau allows over our borders because of the weak inspection system. And the drugs that come across the border, the existence of Roxham Road and other illegal border crossings that Justin Trudeau opened right after he put out a tweet to the entire world saying, "Welcome to Canada, come on in, we'll invite anybody across our borders." That chaos has persisted. It is clear that after 9 years, Trudeau is not worth the cost, the crime, the corruption, and the chaos. He has lost control of our border, lost control of immigration, lost control of our finances. And that is why today I am calling on the government to fix Trudeau's broken border. I'm demanding that the Trudeau government quickly present a Canada First plan to Parliament that includes increased patrols, working with provincial law enforcement, deploying new technology, cracking down on illegal drug production and trafficking, tightening visas, securing our ports, and expanding the mandate of CBSA officers to fix the broken border. These new technologies would include scanners, helicopters, towers, drones. We also propose temporarily deputizing provincial law enforcement whose premiers wish to fill in the holes the Trudeau government has caused. This, of course, is I'm embarrassed that we even have to suggest this, but it would be a temporary measure to fix what Trudeau, or to patch up the holes that Trudeau has opened. We need a real crackdown on illegal drug production and trafficking by reversing, for example, the C5 changes that Trudeau brought in, which reduced penalties for production and trafficking of hard drugs. We need boots on the ground, scanners all around, and a stronger border. We need to expand the mandate of CBSA officers to enforce the law beyond border posts. The reality is that Trudeau has lost control of the deficit of immigration and of our border. In less than 2 months, President Trump will come into office. He has threatened the possibility of imposing tariffs unless there is action to address Trudeau's broken border. Since Trudeau became Prime Minister, there have been massive increases in illegal border activity. It is his job to immediately introduce action to solve it. Now, it's not just for Donald Trump. Frankly, we have to acknowledge that he is the new President of the United States of America, and we have to protect our economic interests, but we have to protect our own interests. It is unacceptable for Canadians to have 47,000 overdose deaths. It is unacceptable for Canadians to have 350 crime groups actively producing and shipping fentanyl. It is unacceptable for Canadians to have $100 billion of money laundering. It is unacceptable for Canadians to see a 200% increase in overdose deaths. Even if President Trump were not calling for this action, we should be doing it for our own country and for our own interests. And these increased border measures should be paid for using the dollar-for-dollar principle, which will guide my government. And that is why I'm proposing to fund a bolstered border. The Prime Minister should cut high-priced CBSA consultants and cancel the $6 billion of insulting inflationary spending, the 2-month tax trick, and the inflationary checks. That money will only give us more inflation while jacking up debt. A $250 check will not mean anything to someone who loses their job because of a tariff dispute. A 10-cent savings on a bag of pretzels will not mean anything to a mother who's lost her child to an overdose of drugs. And as for getting it passed, while we will plan to continue insisting that the Trudeau government stop blocking Parliament and release all the data to the police on the Green Slush Fund scandal, we will make accommodations to quickly pass a border plan if it goes towards fixing Trudeau's broken border, so we can get it done. There are no excuses. Justin Trudeau has had 9 years, and the results are a disaster. But the good news is life was not like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like this after he's gone. We're going to bring home a common sense plan to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. That requires a strong, robust border, like the one we had before Trudeau, with boots on the ground, with security at our ports and other land entries. It means a stronger armed forces, stronger police, and stronger law enforcement. It means protecting our people against the world's dangers. All of this is for the singular purpose that I am running for Prime Minister, which is to restore Canada's promise. That is, a country where hard work earns a powerful paycheck and pension that buys affordable food and homes in safe neighborhoods. A country where anyone from anywhere can do anything. In Canada, let's bring it home.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from the floor.
Thank you. Jeremy from CTV News. Your party continues to lead public opinion polls. If you form government, how quickly would you meet NATO's defense spending target of 2%?
That's a good question. First of all, let's all acknowledge that I will be inheriting a dumpster fire of a budget. The national debt has been doubled. The deficit is raging out of control. We know last year's deficit was at least 20% bigger than Trudeau claimed. The Prime Minister won't even tell us what this year's deficit is after having asked him all of those times. Our economic growth is collapsing. Per capita GDP dropped for 6 quarters in a row. I'm not saying this to dodge your question. I'm just telling you what the mess I'm going to be inheriting, because we have to fund our military out of the money that we have. What I have said so far is that I will be cutting foreign aid, by taking money away from dictators, terrorists, and global bureaucracies. I'll be cutting back office bureaucracy and ending the procurement boondoggles. We will put all of that extra savings into rebuilding our armed forces, expanding the reserves, and deepening our presence in the north to protect our part of North America and reassure our American allies that we are a solid security partner. That is going to be necessary not just for our security, but for our economy.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Poilievre. JP Tasker, CBC News. Can I ask you about asylum seekers? The number of asylum seekers has essentially tripled over the last 7 years. We're up to 130,000, on pace for more this year. The number of resettled refugees has also doubled. Is it time for a hard cap on the number of asylum seekers and refugees, and what's an acceptable number to you?
I think it is time for a cap, and it's time to get rid of all of the abuse. One of the problems we have now is that Trudeau got rid of the visa requirement for Mexico and basically allowed thousands of people to come here who are not refugees, who are ultimately rejected as refugees, but only after many years of us paying their bills and funding their legal cases and paying for the bureaucracy of treating their case. We need to shut off the flow of false refugee claims who are in no danger in their country of origin, but who are sneaking in either through our porous border, through our weak visa system, and then when they land here, making a false claim. And by the way, I'm not accusing them of making false claims. The refugee board ultimately finds those claims are false. But in the interim period, we're stuck with the false claimant for 5, 6, 7 years. And this is putting enormous strain on our housing market, our healthcare system, and our job market, where our Canadian jobs are being taken by black market, under-the-table workers that take cash and ultimately deprive our people of jobs. Now, I have real refugees. I love real refugees. Our country was built in large part by real refugees who were genuinely fleeing danger, like my wife. But I have no time for people who lie to come into our country, and that is the problem we have to cut off. And when we do, we can get back to the normal levels of refugee counts that we had before Justin Trudeau, the numbers that we can absorb, care for, and employ, and that's what we will do when I'm Prime Minister.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning. Najuda Malisignian Press. On the issue of what you would cut and what you would fund, what do you say to Canadians who are currently receiving dental coverage through the Canada Dental Care plan, can they expect to continue receiving coverage if a Conservative government forms?
Well, right now we have a lot of promises from Justin Trudeau. The biggest winner so far has been Sun Life, the insurance company that got the contract to deliver this. Justin Trudeau is making a lot of very big promises, but on all of those promises, he's failing to deliver. So we're carefully looking to find out what numbers are true. We're not going to regurgitate government numbers that prove always to be false later on. I think it's unfortunate that so many in the media simply regurgitate government talking points rather than actually doing the serious analysis. I mean, you guys all reported that the carbon tax was going to make people better off, and then what did we find out from the Parliamentary Budget Officer? That 100% of middle-class Canadians are worse off from the carbon tax. 60% of the population will pay more than they get back. But if we had simply believed the talking points from the government that the media regurgitated, we would have been fooled like all of you. So am I going to just take Justin Trudeau's word for it on these promises? No, I'm not. I'm going to look at the numbers and see what he's actually delivering and then act in the interest of all Canadians.
Thank you. Next question.
Bonjour, Félix Pilon de Radio-Canada. La rencontre de Justin Trudeau vendredi.
On a mis aux politiques de leur projet. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est le de M. Et que, comme noté, Donald Trump les obstacles. The question again?
Please.
Oh, thank you. All right. What was the question again? I'm sorry. The question about the meeting, look, I just felt, well, while I'm a critic of Mr. Trudeau's, I did feel badly that he went in with such a position of weakness.
Because he's a weak
Normally
leader.
when a prime minister goes
He's
to
a
the
weak
United States
man.
to meet a president, they're looking to make gains. What gains did we hear from Mr. Trudeau? None. He's just trying to limit losses. Did he come back saying we're going to get an exemption to Buy America, like Harper achieved from Bush? No, Buy America is still in place. Did he say we're going to get an end to the softwood lumber tariffs, like Prime Minister Harper got from President Bush? No, not only are they still in place, Biden just doubled them. All Justin Trudeau offers is minimizing losses. And this is the consequence of having a weak prime minister who's lost control of our borders, lost control of immigration, lost control of crime and drugs, and lost control of our economy. And Canadians are paying a dreadful price for everything that Justin Trudeau has broken. And we need a strong prime minister who has the brains and backbone to put Canada first and to fight for our workers and our security.
Thank you. This will be the final question.
Mickey here with Politico. Who from Trump's transition team have you or your party been in touch with since the U.S. election?
I'm not the prime minister. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, alrighty. That's how he's going to end that one off. Look, man. Pierre knows how to speak. He knows how to sing a very sweet song, as you could say. My biggest issue with him is, as he is acknowledged, he's going to be inheriting an absolute dumpster fire. And on top of that, he has promised so much. And the list of things he promises just continues to get longer and longer. Whether it's fixing the softwood lumber deals, or building new natural gas liquefaction plants, to removing the carbon tax, to building new homes and removing the GST, to defunding the CBC, the list just continues. And at this point, it's starting to feel like he might actually not be able to come through on literally everything he promises. As much as I want to believe in him, as much as I do think he would probably be a better option than Trudeau, I mean, at this point, anybody probably is. He just keeps promising and promising. And I don't know, guys. I don't know, man. I don't know. Anyway, let's get into the House of Commons proceedings. Thank you all for joining. If you are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. Let's see what they're talking about.
End of the previous, you know, people stuffing money in little bags all going around the place. They tried to deny that as well, if we all recall. They said,
somebody needs to keep him accountable. We need a department within our government that tracks everything, keeps everybody accountable. We need our own Department of Government Efficiency. We cannot allow another government to come in and just reign free, do what they please. We have been screwed far too much. And if another government comes in and just rinses and repeats, which very likely could happen, it's getting a bit ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's gone a bit too far.
at the department. That may well very have been the case. But if that was the case, why wouldn't they just release the documents? Because they don't have absolute control over the people that work there. The only reason why they'd be hiding documents that likely have criminality involved is because the criminality just keeps moving up the food chain to people who knew. And that is the reason why they are refusing to release these documents, and why they've paralyzed this Parliament for the last 4 weeks in their absolute obstinance to release the documents. They are so desperate to cover this up that they might have this go on for the next 15 months. Because why? They know the documents will bring an end to their government. They're that damning. It's the only explanation that you can do. So, again, they said there was no criminality. That's one of their defenses to this. Then they've said there's no criminal intent. That's the other one. Well, it's interesting because there's a whistleblower that talked about criminal intent. Imagine that. And this is what this whistleblower said. I know the federal government, like the minister, has continued saying that there was no criminal intent and nothing was found. But I think the committee would agree that they're not to be trusted on this situation. Sometimes you get real pearls of wisdom from people who come forward and make statements on this. I think the committee would agree that they're not to be trusted on this situation. So what this Liberal government is asking Canadians to do is to trust them on these documents. We've produced documents and we've redacted 90% of what's in the documents, or 80%, whatever it is. Just trust us. There's nothing damning in these redactments. It's just standard procedure. I think what we've learned from these NDP Liberals is they absolutely cannot be trusted with these kinds of documents. Remember what we heard way back in the day with respect to Jody Wilson-Raybould? The story in the Globe and Mail is false. Does everyone remember that? That's what the Prime Minister said. And then remarkably, the story was actually true. So when we look at whether or not they should be trusted on this, I think there's no one. Well, there might be a few, hardcore Liberal supporters in downtown Toronto that still want to trust them. But anywhere else in the country, let me tell you, the trust with these guys is at zero, as it should be. The whistleblower goes on to say, I would happily agree to whatever findings the RCMP would find, but I wouldn't trust that there isn't criminality unless the RCMP fully investigates. So again, another whistleblower saying, we can't trust them, we think there's criminality here, and the RCMP should investigate for criminality. So we go back to asking ourselves the question, why won't they release the documents? And the reason why, and I know I've said this several times, but I think it is really important to hit this point home. The reason why they won't release the documents, despite 4 weeks of Parliament, 4+ weeks of not getting their agenda through Parliament, is because they know, right? They just know. They know that the degree of criminality that's going to be found in these documents, they know how damning it's going to be for their government. And let me phrase this in a way that everyone can understand. So this is a government that's been mired in scandals for the past 2 years. So they're not new to scandal, right? It's not something new or shocking. So you'd think at a certain point they'd be like, well, another scandal, it's no big deal. We'll just get those documents out. It'll blow over in a couple of weeks, right? But they don't. They're still here obstructing Parliament and not producing the documents. So it goes back to the fact that this is not your everyday run-of-the-mill scandal. It's really sad, actually, when you have to say that phrase. It's not your everyday run-of-the-mill scandal by a government. That's actually how many scandals and how corrupt this government has been proven to be that we get to use that phrase. But it's not a run-of-the-mill scandal. Or they just release the documents. They do what they normally do. They would do like a Friday evening document dump. We all know it. That's when the government takes out the trash. They put something out at 5 p.m. on a Friday, usually a long weekend like Thanksgiving or the August long weekend, because they know Canadians aren't paying attention. But guess what? They didn't even do a document dump on this. Again, why? Because they know what's in these documents will bring about the end of this government. Now, we know there's going to be an end. When we have a carbon tax election, which is coming, that will be the end for them. And they just want to desperately hold on as long as they can. The NDP wants to hold on as long as they can because their leader needs his pension. So we know that's why they keep propping up the Liberals at every opportunity. They say they ripped up the agreement, but they prop them up. So we know this government's unfortunately going to keep going. And that if they release these documents, it would actually be the end. Even the NDP wouldn't be able to prop them up anymore because the documents are so bad, which is why they're not releasing the documents. And it's why we are where we are today. And it brings no joy to me to be here speaking about this another time. They've made this choice. And the conflicts that go on in this program are really unbelievable. So we've got another minister now mired in scandal. So first of all, we've got the minister who was responsible for SDTC, who we've conclusively come to the conclusion either incompetent or involved in this scheme. Or now we also have the Minister of the Environment, who was a strategic advisor for Cycle Capital Management. And oh, guess what? Cycle Capital Management got a whole bunch of money from the Green Slush Fund. Now, I wonder how that happened. I wonder why, given that, they don't want to release the documents. Because they've got at least 2 ministers who we know will be very badly exposed from the documents. I will end this with this. This has gone on long enough.
Yes, it has.
All they have to do, it's very simple, release the unredacted documents, and we can get back to the business of the House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
This SDTC situation has gone on for almost 2 months now. At this point, I just want to see MPs get fired for not doing their job. Get rid of people. Start getting rid of people. Take some serious action. Let's get things moving back in Canada. This is pathetic. This makes our country look weak and just continues to make everybody in Parliament, no matter which side you belong to, just an idiot, a fool. How has this gone on this long?
Today, was he approached? Was there foreign interference that asked him to step aside? There will be testimony coming forward before December 10th on this. He has the opportunity to tell the House today, was he coerced? Was he being influenced to switch his leadership support?
I just want to thank everybody for being here right now. If you are new, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. We are currently in the House of Commons proceedings watching the SDTC debate.
I see the honourable member is standing up. The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon. I'll give him the opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a disgusting slur, even for that member, who always sinks to the bottom of the barrel when she asks a question. I supported Patrick Brown because I've known him for 20 years. Throughout the course of the campaign, I realized that his vision of Canada did not match with mine as his campaign platform was unrolled. The leader of the opposition, I believed in his platform, and I had a conversation and asked if I could come over and support the current leader of the Conservative Party, and I did. But what you have to ask yourself again is, this member can't even defend what the government has done by asking a question about the matters before us. Instead, she slinks into the gutter to try and cast aspersions on my character. It's disgusting, but unfortunately, it's what I expect from her.
Questions and comments? The honourable member, are there questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
My honourable colleague spoke of the important duty of a government to disclose documents after Parliament has requested them. And of course, I agree with that very much. And he took the present government to task for not disclosing the documents that have been ordered by this House. But he was in this House, and so was I, between 2011 and 2015, when the previous government of Stephen Harper was also ordered to produce documents twice, for the Afghan detainees case, and also to disclose important cost information over its crime legislation, and that government refused, and also defied the will of Parliament and was found in contempt. Can you tell us why? What's the difference between the Harper government refusing to disclose documents in contempt of this House and the current government doing so?
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Well, the NDP Liberal coalition is alive and well. Rather than taking the government to task for their failure to produce corruption documents, and I understand why the member's probably not asking about that, because he knows once the documents come out, they won't be able to prop up the government anymore, and his leader won't get his pension, and they'll actually have to try and vote non-confidence in the government, which they are catastrophically afraid of doing. So instead of talking about the task at hand, he tries to bring up something from 15 years ago to distract. The NDP Liberal coalition is alive and well in Parliament, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly appreciate the member's intervention here today. Obviously, the SDTC scandal at its heart is about those that have a path to the very heights of government, the insiders, and the rest of us. And there are two sets of rules. We've known during the pandemic, the government gave out money through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And many individuals in my riding, I'm sure in his, were found to be ineligible and had to pay back every single dime to CRA, despite all the challenges that they had. Yet here we have where the Auditor General has found the same thing has happened with SDTC monies, where ineligible companies were allowed to have it. Now, does the member believe that A, it's common sense that these monies should absolutely be paid back? And B, does he believe the government has a duty to force those payments to come back?
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
I mean, the short answer to that is yes. It's another program where there's been catastrophic mismanagement by this NDP Liberal government. And what I talked about in my speech was, in fact, that they chose to give non-competitive bid contracts to one company, $313 million worth of contracts out of $342 million, to one company with non-competitive bids. And that company decided to have the program administered mostly through Brazil. So you can imagine, it's Canadian dollars to support a Canadian program that actually went to a company that hired people in Brazil. You can't make up this kind of incompetence on top of the fact that $3.5 billion went to 77,000 recipients who were ineligible. Now, was there malfeasance in this? I think that needs to be looked into as well, because we know how corrupt this NDP Liberal government has been.
Questions and comments? The honourable member, the honourable parliamentary secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's truly amazing in terms of the degree in which we witness a leader of the Conservative Party being borderline in contempt of Parliament. Whether it's here where we do not want to provide
nobody
this
wants to listen
information
to
the
you.
Conservative Party of Canada, unredacted, directly over to the RCMP. For a good reason. The RCMP don't want it. We're listening to the RCMP, the Auditor General of Canada. On the other hand, we have a leader of the Conservative Party, borderline contempt, refuses to get a security clearance, and then yet today, Madam Speaker, what do we find out? We find out out that there is a direct link to the leadership of the Conservative Party and foreign interference, and we still get the leader of the Conservative Party saying, no, I don't want to get the security clearance. Can the member clearly indicate to the people of Brampton, to all Canadians, why it is that the leader of the Conservative Party is the only leader in the House of Commons that continues to thumb his nose at Canadians and not get the security clearance?
Great question.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
He got angry.
Of order somewhere. The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Madam Speaker, you've ruled on the case of relevance a number of times today. The parliamentary secretary continues to talk about anything but the privilege motion, and I believe he's being disrespectful to the chair. I'd ask you to rule accordingly.
Other point of order. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the member might be sensitive to the issue. I am being completely irrelevant. The reason why we're having the debate today is to have information transferred over to the Procedures and House Affairs Committee. The leader of the Conservative Party, I believe, is being borderline in contempt of Parliament by forcing members of the Conservative Party to speak up, talking about the character of the leader of the Conservative Party, and that's what my question was about. We have had numerous, literally hundreds of questions related to this. The member is wrong to try to limit my freedom of speech inside the House by not allowing me to talk about an issue that Canadians are concerned about.
As I've indicated before, the relevance should be linked to it. The honourable member did put the relevance at the beginning of his question, although the question at the end was a little bit not relevant, but I just want to say he did have some relevancy within that question. The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
You know, Madam Speaker, in law school we learned a maxim. When you have the facts on your side, argue the facts. When you have the law on your side, argue the law. When you have neither the facts nor the law on your side, raise your voice and bang your desk. And that's exactly what we just got from this NDP Liberal member. Now, let's talk about a couple things. If they want to improve national security, they can release the names. That's what we've been calling for. Just like they could release the documents. Do you see the pattern there? They want to claim all these kinds of privileges while they hide information that they claim is not necessary. So, the Prime Minister has allegedly had access to all this information, hasn't done a single thing to protect anyone in this country from a single scintilla of foreign interference, but somehow this so-called security briefing, which is mostly a muzzling order, would change things. It's not. The way they can do it is, let's have sunlight. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Release the names of the people alleged to be involved in foreign interference and release the documents. Let's have some transparency. Oh, wait a minute. They ran on being an open and transparent government 9 years ago. Wow.
Yikes.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Barrie.
The $9 million bathtub in the sky.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to the member from Dufferin-Caledon for his great words this morning. Madam Speaker, we're hearing more and more about this scandal. We've been talking about it now for months. How much money's gone missing, how many ethics charges are out there. It's just getting unbelievable. But now hearing more, even this morning from the Auditor General's report, things are just growing more and more. My only concern is that there's so many scandals, so many issues out there, people are losing track. But, Madam Speaker, my colleague opposite did, from Dufferin-Caledon, mentioned about some of the whistleblowers' testimony. One of the ones maybe he didn't mention, I'd just like to rephrase it if I could and get his comments on that. This was directly from the SDTC whistleblower, and I quote, "I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare. And they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC and the public sphere." Maybe he has some comments on that and why these documents aren't being produced.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
It's nice to have a relevant question, not questions from the government trying to dismiss this and distract. So, look, this is 100% true. We have to go back to what I said in my speech. Why these whistleblowers make great points. So then you have to ask yourself, why the cover-up? Why are they covering up these documents? Why are they hiding these documents? They're hiding the documents because they know how damning they will be, not just for their government, but for the ministers involved. It's the only reason. So with the terrible mismanagement of this program, either the minister involved was incompetent and therefore should be fired, or the minister was involved in the corruption, which is why they're trying to hide it. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Is it just me, or is it kind of funny how they brought up that list of 11 or 12 MPs that were linked to foreign interference like last month, and then everybody just seemed to completely forget about it over the past few weeks up to now? Seems like that just kind of got swept under the rug, didn't it?
400 million taxpayer dollars that improperly went out the door, according to the Auditor General. 330 million of that involved conflicts of interest involving board members, 186 conflicts of interest, and multiple violations of the law, violations of the SDTC Act. And in the face of such a scandal, Canadians can rightly ask how it is that board members who were Liberal insiders engaged in conflicts of interest and funneled tens of millions of dollars into companies that they had interests in and got away with it for so long. Well, very simply, Madam Speaker, how this happened and why they got away with it for so long is because after 9 years of this Prime Minister, we have a government in which there is a culture of rot and corruption, a culture of rot and corruption that goes right to the top, right to the Prime Minister. This is a Prime Minister who fired his Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould when she defied his unethical and unlawful orders to interfere in the prosecution of SNC Lavalin. This is a Prime Minister who is hid behind cabinet confidence to obstruct an RCMP criminal investigation into his potential wrongdoing. This is a Prime Minister who has the distinction of being the first Prime Minister in Canadian history to be found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, not once, but twice. And given that, it reflects what we have seen at SDTC, and it also perhaps explains why it is that as we speak, there are sitting members of the cabinet who, like the Prime Minister, have been found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, including the Minister of International Trade and the Minister of Public Safety. And I would also mention the Liberal member for Hull Elmer, who was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act while he served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. And then there is the Liberal member for Edmonton Centre, who 2 weeks ago resigned from Cabinet in disgrace. This is someone who got caught violating the Conflict of Interest Act when he was involved in the operations of a shady PPE company in direct violation of the Act while he sat in Cabinet. More than that, the member for Edmonton Centre's company has been ordered by Alberta courts to pay back clients nearly $8 million for ripping them off. It faces 7 lawsuits alleging fraud, and the Edmonton police have opened a criminal investigation into the member's company. So, Madam Speaker, all of this is to say is that there is a culture of rot, corruption, and conflict from top to bottom in this government, and it has been happening from practically day one when this Prime Minister took office. And consistent with that rotten culture, it comes as no surprise that former Liberal Minister Navdeep Bains, when he was the Industry Minister, appointed a conflicted chair to the chair as that of SDTC. Annette Verscharen was someone who no doubt had a fair amount of business experience, but she had, as I alluded to, a major problem. She had a conflict of interest insofar as her company was receiving $2.2 million from SDTC. That is a blatant conflict of interest, and it ought to have immediately disqualified her from that role. But Navdeep Bains, being in the cabinet of a corrupt and conflicted government, said conflicts be damned, and he appointed Annette Verscheren as chair. And it was from that time onward, that we saw the self-dealing, the conflicts, and the mismanagement that were identified in the Auditor General's report. Almost all of it occurred under the time that Annette Verscheren served as chair, someone who was hand-picked by Navdeep Bains. Now, at or around the time that Verscheren was appointed by Bains to serve as chair, the SDTC board adopted a conflict of interest policy that encouraged corruption. This is a policy, just to give this House, through you, Madam Speaker, an illustration of what was contained in this policy. The conflict of interest policy permitted directors to buy and sell securities within companies funded by SDTC within 3 days of a public announcement. And so, to illustrate this policy in action, a board member could sit in and vote to fund a company on Monday, and it be the project funding being announced Monday. The same director could go and buy and sell securities in that company on Thursday. It's akin to insider trading. And at the Public Accounts Committee, the Liberal member for Beaches East York took great exception when I characterized it as that. But I would remind the member, through you, Madam Chair, that it is completely at odds with the rules of the Ontario Securities Commission for publicly traded companies, rules relating specifically to insider trading and self-dealing. No wonder, because, as I said, Madam Speaker, it's akin to insider trading. Pursuant to the rules of the Ontario Securities Commission, publicly traded companies, directors of those companies, can only buy and sell shares on a limited basis outside of the quarterly financial reporting periods. But here you had a policy that basically allowed members to get rich with insider information. Total corruption. If the member for Beaches East York wants to dispute that it's insider trading, it certainly is corruption. And, Madam Speaker, not only did the policy give a green light to essentially insider trading, it also violated the standards provided for in the Conflict of Interest Act. Now, why is that a problem? Well, among the problems with that is that 7 of the 14 board members were appointed by Cabinet. They were GIC appointments and therefore bound by the Conflict of Interest Act, and yet you had a policy at SDTC that violated the Conflict of Interest Act and also violated the SDTC Act, specifically Section 12.2, no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities. And yet, Madam Speaker, that is precisely what happened again and again and again at SDTC. The Auditor General found that 5 out of 15 board members, so a third of the board, had interests in companies that were being funded by SDTC while they sat on the board, in blatant conflicts of interest and in blatant violation of the SDTC Act. One such example involves the chair herself, Ms. Verscheren. She voted to funnel, and not only voted, but actually moved 2 motions to funnel $38.5 million into SDTC companies under the guise of being so-called COVID relief payments, payments that the Auditor General determined to be improper and outside of the scope of the contribution agreements with the Department of Industry. So $38.5 million of mismanagement, pretty bad. But even worse, arguably, is that $220,000 of that went into her own company, Enerstore. And as I noted, Ms. Verscheren is a woman with vast business experience and vast experience sitting on corporate boards. It shouldn't take someone with that experience. It frankly is a matter of common sense to know that it is completely unethical and a conflict of interest to sit on a board and move a motion to funnel money into one's company. Not only is it a conflict of interest, I would say there's another word for it. It's called stealing. Stealing taxpayers' money, and Ms. Verscheren was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner for that blatant conflict. And, Madam Speaker, then there's Andre-Lise Matteau. She is a close associate of the radical Environment Minister. Ms. Matteau came to the Public Accounts Committee and admitted that SDTC funneled $10.4 million into companies that she had interest in. Now, she said, I identified that I had a conflict and that I left the room. But of course, Madam Speaker, that isn't good enough. I mean, think about it. It's not good enough in the context of a board member saying, I have a conflict, therefore I'm going to leave the room, and the board votes to funnel $10.4 million into my companies, and then I come back and another board member leaves the room and the board votes to funnel money into that member's companies. And that occurred again and again, 186 times. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I mean, it speaks to a culture of total corruption. So yes, she can argue I technically recused myself, but come on. And Madam Speaker, it's further not good enough because it violates the SDTC Act. Not profiting, not gaining, not acquiring property. That is strictly prohibited, but there was Matteau cashing in $10.4 million in unlawful payments approved by the board. And when I put it to her at committee that she had blatantly violated the SDTC Act, she had no answer. It was almost as if she was taken aback, speaking to the degree to which there was a culture of conflict and entitlement that permeated the SDTC board for so many years under former Liberal Minister Baines's watch and the current minister's watch. And the ministers say, well, they didn't really know anything about it, that SDTC is an arm's-length foundation. Well, Madam Speaker, that is hardly an excuse. We're talking about $1 billion taxpayer dollars, $1 billion taxpayer dollars, and you have a former minister, Madam Speaker, and a current minister who basically try to wash their hands clean and say, forget about the $400 million, forget about the $330 million involving conflicts of board members, forget 186 conflicts of interest. It wasn't my responsibility. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General's report is an indictment of the lack of oversight provided under the two ministers, Baines and the current minister. And it's an absolute indictment, the report, but it's worse than that because there was someone who, according to the Deputy Minister, was the department's eyes and ears at every one of these Green Slush Fund board meetings. The Assistant Deputy Minister, Andrew Noseworthy, he sat there as there were 186 conflicts of interest, as tens of millions of dollars were funneled into the companies of board members. And he appeared before the Public Accounts Committee last Thursday. And he claimed, or his excuse was that he had no independent way of verifying conflicts of interest.
Yes, it's the $400 million slush puppy fund. Okay, if you guys are here right now, thank you for watching and being here. We will be getting into question period very, very soon. 5 to 10 minutes. We'll probably get some statements by members, and then after that happens, the circus truly begins. So thank you all for joining. Let's get back into it.
Weeks before the meeting, in which board members were then invited to identify those projects in which they had conflicts of interest or proposed projects. At the beginning of each meeting, that the secretary would then read out those members who had identified conflicts of interest while Noseworthy was sitting there. So I said, that simply can't be true. So Noseworthy said, after he got caught misleading committee, to come up with the response that it wasn't his fiduciary duty to report on these conflicts and corruption. It wasn't his fiduciary duty. It speaks not only to a culture of wrought conflict and corruption that goes right to the top of SDTC's leadership with Ms. Verscheren, right to the top with members of this cabinet and the Prime Minister, but it also speaks to a complete level of contempt for taxpayers' money by this government. And, Madam Speaker, I have to say I'm just flabbergasted by that testimony, but perhaps I shouldn't be flabbergasted because, again, it goes back to this culture of corruption that is so embedded in this government. And so here we are, nearly more than 2 months after this House ordered the government to turn over all documents relating to SDTC so that they in turn can be turned over by the law clerk to the RCMP. And more than 2 months later, we still don't have the documents. And it begs the question, why? And the only plausible explanation is that what is contained in those documents is really, really bad. We know, based upon the Auditor General's...
Oh, it's not just bad. It is extremely bad. It's so bad that the papers and documents they have handed over are completely redacted.
...in this government encouraged or tolerated conflicts of interest, such as Baines hand-picking Verscheren to serve as chair, notwithstanding that she had a conflict of interest. And we know that these ministers had to have known that all was not well at SDTC, given the fact that they had an eyes and ears sitting in on each of these meetings. And so, and we also know, Madam Speaker, from the whistleblower, that despite the minister's assertion that he took action when he learned of wrongdoing, that isn't so, that the minister was more interested in protecting himself and protecting the insiders who got rich, and was prepared to take steps to cover up for as long as possible this massive scandal. Well, Madam Speaker, the government's refusal to turn over the documents, to black out thousands and thousands of pages of documents, is a continuation of the cover-up.
It's like Hillary deleting the emails.
The bottom line is that heads need to roll. There needs to be accountability.
Oh, he's calling for the guillotine.
We need to get fully to the bottom of this massive scandal. If there is criminal wrongdoing, then the RCMP needs that evidence, and taxpayers need to be made whole from these Liberal insiders. And until so long as this government continues to block and obstruct this House order, we're going to continue to stand up for taxpayers and demand the release of the documents.
The honourable member will have 10 minutes of questions and comments the next time this matter is before the House. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member Nepean.
Madam Speaker, for over 150 years, Chinese Canadians have made remarkable contributions to building Canada. From working in mines and railways in the past to driving Canada's leadership in the knowledge-based economy and advanced technologies, Chinese Canadians have been and continue to be a vital force in Canada's socio-economic development. With a rich cultural heritage spanning thousands of years, the Chinese people have profoundly contributed to humanity through advancements in science, medicine.
This guy is just blowing Xi Jinping right now.
To preserve and promote this invaluable culture and heritage, ensuring that all Canadians, today and in the future, can learn from and celebrate its significance. I call on Canada to designate February each year as National Chinese Heritage Month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He really loves Winnie the Pooh. Darth Fungus has arrived.
Mr. Speaker, when a child becomes sick, it takes a terrible toll on the entire family. This burden becomes so much greater by the fact that hospitals with pediatric services are often located a significant distance from the family's home. This is where Ronald McDonald House Charities steps in to provide accommodations, meals, peer support, and other services to the entire family while their child is being treated in a nearby hospital. Unfortunately, my home city of Regina is one of the major centres in Canada that, until now, does not have a Ronald McDonald House, despite the growing need. Fortunately, RMHC recently launched their Miles to Go campaign to build a new facility in Regina within walking distance from the Regina General Hospital. I applaud Ronald McDonald House Charities for investing in the Regina General Hospital neighbourhood, and I encourage everyone to support this worthwhile cause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done, well done.
The honourable member for Oakville North Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christmas is fast approaching, and thanks to the Oakville Professional Firefighters Association Toy Drive, children and youth in need in our community will have a gift under the tree. Last year, they distributed gifts for 5,137 local kids, bringing smiles and joy. Gifts can be dropped off at any Oakville Fire Hall or at the drive-through toy drive at Coronation Park on December 13th from 5 till 9. The toy drive has been led by Kurt Merriman for over a decade. Kurt grew the toy drive significantly, putting in thousands of volunteer hours to bring Christmas joy to so many. He partnered with local organizations, including the Toronto Rock, to be able to provide more and more kids with gifts each year. Kurt has left Oakville for a new position in the fire service, and on behalf of all members in this House, I'd like to thank him for his elf work in Oakville with the toy drive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. In 2024, we highlight the 30th anniversary of the Community Association of Otiamaska. 160 people met to celebrate this event. We to recognise the inestimable work done by all the member organisations. Certificates were awarded to the various organisations to highlight their commitment to the community over time. To highlight this, Christian Morissette, a singer and songwriter, produced a music video for the company. We can be proud of this movement and its impact in defending seniors, women, people living with disabilities, the homeless, just to name a few. Over the last 30 years, they have defended their community to create and maintain coherence and cohesion in between organizations. Nicolas and all the team, happy 30th and long life to your organization. The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-la-Petite-Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time of the year, when we are all getting ready to celebrate Christmas and the New Year, we're planning the family holiday menu, we're buying gifts for children, relatives, and friends. Whilst the commercial giants offer an array of discounted items, we must not forget small businesses, artisans, and farmers and producers in our communities. Buying local means investing in our economy by helping to create jobs, as well as supporting local businesses and producers, especially my region. It also means reducing our ecological footprint, because the fewer the kilometers between us and our products, the less the products will have to be transported and therefore less greenhouse gas. This Christmas, let us buy local and let us support our local trade.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Last month, as part of an anti-Israel mob in Montreal, a woman named Mai Abdelhadi was recorded giving Nazi salutes and stating that the final solution was coming.
Wild.
It turns out that this woman was a franchise owner of 2 Second Cup cafes at Montreal's Jewish hospital.
And they booted her ass
Peter
out.
Mamis, the CEO of the company that owns the Second Cup coffee chain, swiftly issued a statement unequivocally condemning the deplorable actions of this woman and immediately terminated her relationship with his company. I would like to commend Mr. Mamis for demonstrating moral clarity when it was required. By acting swiftly and decisively, he showed that he would give no quarter to anti-Semites. Compare that to the actions of this Liberal government, who have tried to appease those who stoke division and hate in Canada. That it took the Prime Minister almost a day to issue any sort of statement with regard to the recent anti-Semitic Montreal riots is a disgrace. Thank you to Peter Mamis for demonstrating this strong, decisive moral clarity needed to maintain Canada's peaceful pluralism. The Prime Minister could learn a thing or two from him.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, December 2nd marks the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. Most of us think about the Atlantic slave trade insofar as we think about slavery at all. World Vision estimates that there are multiple more people enslaved now than there were then. 21st century supply chains have brought this scourge to our shores. This Parliament passed S211. The first reporting date was in May of this year. What the reports show is that the supply chains are deeply infected. Of the 6,000 entities reporting, 38% identified disturbing issues.
China.
Multiple more
China.
did not report at all. I take some encouragement from the government's willingness to be proactive, but the data needs to be analyzed, needs at least one more reporting cycle, and more entities need to be willing or unwillingly brought into the regime. Slavery may be as old as humanity, Mr. Speaker, but it doesn't mean that you need to support it by purchasing its products.
China. Sorry, guys, I'm getting this insane cold right now. I think it's China.
Today was World AIDS Day, a day to remember the 42 million people who've died from AIDS, to remember our relatives and our friends. I remember in 1982 as a medical student seeing a poster about a mysterious outbreak of a deadly pneumonias in the gay community of San Francisco. 4 years later in Toronto, we were seeing a lot of cases of AIDS. In the late 1980s, in Swaziland in southern Africa, where I was working, it went from 0 cases of HIV to 26% of pregnant women being HIV positive within a few short years. AIDS was and is a pandemic. HIV and AIDS was for a long time absolutely a death sentence. The discovery of antiretrovirals has turned AIDS into a manageable chronic condition. Although our work is not yet done, making ARVs available to millions of people globally has absolutely been one of the greatest triumphs of the modern era. Thank you.
The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has completely lost control of Canada's borders. Today, there are over 260,000 unprocessed refugee claims, a staggering 2,500% increase since 2015, when there was just one shy of 10,000. Government documents also show that up to 3 million temporary resident visas will expire by the end of next year. Yet the Immigration Minister's only solution is to hope people leave voluntarily. At committee, he deflected, offering vague responses about monitoring and partnerships. Canadians deserve better than a minister who can't explain how his department enforces immigration rules. After 9 years of chaos, it's clear that this NDP Liberal coalition has no plan to fix the immigration system they've broken. Even migrant activists have stated that voluntary compliance is not happening. Only a Conservative government will fix our broken borders and ensure it works for Canadians first.
Mr. McCauley.
The honourable member for Humber River Black Creek.
Our government continues to take decisive and aggressive action to address crime across Canada, having created offences to target organized crime gangs that exploit young people. We have also invested over $600 million into fighting guns and gangs and passed gun control laws to take violent weapons out of our communities. These efforts and many more have been implemented to tackle crime and invest in public safety. I would like to recognize the dedicated work of 31 Division in Humber River Black Creek, especially Superintendent Mandeep Mann, Inspector Jack Kerr, and Officer Melody Carroll. Their tireless efforts, often under challenging circumstances, ensure the safety, well-being, and growth of our community. However, safety isn't just about law enforcement. It requires the active participation of all of us in Humber River Black Creek, including countless community groups and grassroots organizations that play an invaluable role in this effort. By working together, police, local organizations, and residents, we can build safer, stronger communities for all. Thank you.
The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the NDP Liberals are politicizing environmental protection. Instead of focusing on real, tangible results, they're pushing another ideological campaign that will further impoverish Canadians. At a time when 2 million Canadians are going to the food bank every single month, the Liberals are planning to quadruple the carbon tax. Their so-called green energy regulations will further punish the residents of Ontario by adding $35 billion to the electricity generation costs by 2030. Their clean energy plan cannot even be achieved without compromising our grid. Ontario is pleading with the Liberal government to reverse course on these draconian ideological energy mandates. Only Conservatives will protect Canadians from energy poverty and restore energy prosperity to Canada.
Way to go.
The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, today Feed Ontario released its annual hunger report. Over 1 million Ontarians had to access the food bank in the last year. That's more than double the number from the last 4 years. Every day, more Canadians struggle to afford food because of the actions of this Prime Minister. Higher prices are the official policy of the Liberal Party. They plan to quadruple the carbon tax by 2030 to 61 cents a litre on gas. They want to ban 95% of plastic food packaging. When Liberals tax the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who ships the food, then bans the packaging of food, higher prices are the only result. Canadians need to know this is the Liberal policy. If you can't afford to go to the grocery store, you emit less carbon. If you can't afford the price of beef, you emit less carbon. Canadians can't afford this Prime Minister. That's why we need a carbon tax election now.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address a puzzle in our politics. For years, the Conservative leader and his party have lectured Canadians about the virtues of tax cuts. Yet when given the chance to support a GST tax break that puts money in the pockets of working families, what do? They vote against it. The Conservative leader carefully crafts an image of caring for Canadians, but when given the chance to support them with tangible relief, he turns his back on them. Voting against dental care for seniors, voting against the school food program for kids. Mr. Speaker, with each vote, we see the puzzle taking shape. A Conservative leader so fixated on politics, he's forgotten the people. Canada First only works, Mr. Speaker, when you put actual Canadians first.
Order. The honourable member for Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke.
Yesterday marked World AIDS Day. Each year we remember those lost and celebrate the strength and resiliency of those living with HIV/AIDS, those who have supported and cared for them over the past 40 years, and the doctors and researchers who have made significant advances in treatment possible so that ending HIV is now in sight. Canada has adopted the goal set by UNAIDS of eliminating new HIV cases by 2030. but we are falling far short on the actions necessary to make this a reality. Instead, new cases in this country are skyrocketing, up 35% overall in the past year, up 88% in Edmonton. This year's UNAIDS report tells us what we must do. We must work to destigmatize HIV by decriminalizing non-disclosure. We must make access to testing and treatment universal and accessible for those at risk by increasing funding to community-based frontline service organizations who can reach people where they are. Two of those proposals are on the Minister of Health's desk right now. And there's still time to meet the 2030 goal if this government listens to HIV organizations across the country and acts now.
It's the other Randy. It's Cocaine Randy.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Today I would like to pay tribute to an exceptional woman, Huguette Plouffe. For the past 15 years, Huguette has devoted herself to defending the rights of seniors in Repentigny. Head of the AQDR L'Assomption since 2016, Huguette fights tirelessly against mistreatment, improves the quality of life of seniors, and works for their social inclusion. Her dedication has been recognised many times over. Ambassador for Mediation in 2019, recipient of the Michel Aguette Prize in 2021, Huguette even achieved a treble this year, winning the Seniors Prize for la Naudière, the Medal of the Assemblée Nationale, as well as being inducted as Knight of the Repentigny Order. Today it's my turn to pay tribute to her in this house. Madame Plouffe, you are an inspiration to us all, a true force of nature. Thank you for your enthusiasm, your generosity, and your unwavering commitment to the social fabric of our community.
Yes, Randy likes sniffing the powdered donuts.
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are struggling. Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and their time is up. Even the NDP leader admits that the Liberal government is greedy and anti-worker. He's right. The Liberals have proven themselves too weak and too selfish to fight for everyday Canadians. But the NDP have propped up this government at every turn, choosing political survival over the well-being of Canada. Canadians are tired of the NDP saying one thing and doing another. Now their leader faces a crucial decision. Will he stand by his own words or continue to prop up this corrupt Liberal government? Soon, we will present a motion of non-confidence made entirely from the NDP leader's own statements and say that the House proclaims it has lost confidence in the Prime Minister and the government. The question is, will he vote yes or will he vote no? The choice is his. Canadians are watching.
L'honorable député de Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems the Conservative leader has a talent for saying one thing and doing another. Conservatives love to wrap themselves in the flag of tax cuts, but last week they voted against our tax break. That's right, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative leader said no to putting more money back in the pockets of Canadians. Canadians are wondering, do Conservatives believe in affordability, or is it just a soundbite for their YouTube channel? Mr. Speaker, this government believes in action, not slogans. While Conservative oppose solutions, we will keep delivering for Canadians.
All right, and the Lucky Charms guy had his time. Let's move on to question period. Here we go.
All questions, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, more evidence today that the Prime Minister has lost control over spending. The Auditor General has confirmed that this Liberal government gave $3.5 billion from the emergency fund to businesses that were not eligible. That's 10% of recipients. 77,000 businesses, and all of that administered by a consulting company that costs still more money. Doesn't that show that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption? The Honourable Minister of Small Business.
This question is coming from the leader of the opposition who called our life-saving supports for small businesses big, fat government supports and quoted that the Conservatives don't believe in this kind of support. When times are tough, small businesses will not be supported by the Conservative Party of Canada. And on this side of the House, we were there to support close to 900,000 small businesses to keep them from bankruptcy and economic uncertainty. And we will continue to be there for them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader, l'Honourable Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. And now, Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that I'm right. Instead of giving businesses that deserved it some funding, the government wasted $3.5 billion. And in addition, they increased the bureaucracy by 40% to administer these programs. But that seemingly wasn't enough. So they hired Accenture, a consulting company, with another $200 million. This company is partly managed from Brazil, Mr. Speaker. Why always more consultants, more bureaucrats, and more corrupt individuals who are getting money from this government? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about businesses. What have we done for businesses over the last week or so? We have increased the pollution pricing rebate to give that money to businesses. And last week alone, we cut GST so that there will be a GST holiday for businesses throughout Canada. And meanwhile, what is the leader of the opposition doing? He decided to vote against all that. Not just him, but his entire caucus. They all voted against these efforts to help business. That's what the Conservative Party of Canada represents.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
More proof today that this weak Prime Minister, has lost control of spending. The Auditor General reports that his government gave out $3.5 billion of so-called CEBA loans to companies that did not qualify, a total of 77,000 of them. That's 10% of all recipients. On top of that, they then gave a massive implementation contract to high-priced consultants at Accenture who cost $200 million and farmed out a lot of the work to Brazil. Isn't it more proof that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption?
The Honourable Minister for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises.
Mr. Speaker, I find it ironic because for the member from the Mission, Maskey Fraser, actually sent me a letter advocating for CEBA loans to support a small business in his own riding. You see, Mr. Speaker, he understands the value of the CEBA loans because it was a lifeline for small businesses during an unprecedented time. And so we're going to continue to help support businesses, keep their doors open, keep their lights on, and keep their employees working. Mr. Speaker, I find it's unfortunate because yet this is another example of a letter that the Leader of the Opposition did not know about.
Did she replace Randy? Is she the Randy replacement?
Position.
Mr. Speaker, our members champion their constituents who are eligible for assistance. Not 77,000 companies that should not have received the $3.5 billion in misspent dollars. All this while Canadians are starving. Today, the hunger report is out from Feed Ontario, and there have been 1 million Ontarians who lined up 7 million times at the food bank after this Prime Minister brought in a carbon tax on the truckers and farmers who bring us our food. When will they axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we thank Feed Ontario and the food banks across this country who do amazing work. Let me quote from the report that was just mentioned. In June 2022, those over the age of 75 received a permanent 10% increase in old age security alongside inflationary increases. After that change, the percentage of food bank visitors who were seniors began to decrease. This, in addition to the measures we put forward for families, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to deliver for Canadians while they oppose at every opportunity.
And how many of those seniors were offered MAID?
Mr. Speaker, over the last 5 years, food prices in Canada have increased 37% faster than in the United States. That gap opened after the introduction of the carbon tax, which this government now, with the NDP's help, wants to quadruple. The consequence is that in the last 4 years, food bank use in Ontario is up 86%, and 1 in 4 children go to school hungry, according to this government's own data. So why won't they axe this crazy plan to quadruple the carbon tax? In fact, why not axe the tax altogether?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, yet another example of the Conservative leader talking about one thing and doing another. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting children, we have been negotiating school food agreements that are helping actually 200,000 children across this country, and yet the Conservative leader is opposed to that. He talks about lowering taxes, but last week he made every single one of his MPs vote against a GST tax cut for Canadians. He also talks about wanting to hold an opposition day. But we gave him an opportunity today and he ran away from it. Mr. Speaker, that's what weakness looks like when it comes to leadership. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She looks like a UPS driver.
The Honourable.
A UPS driver that just delivers straight bullshit.
The AG report shows very clearly that the Liberals are thumbing their nose at seniors. The federal government doesn't seem to have any idea if its programs like old age security will actually help seniors. It has no idea if pension indexing actually matches inflation. They don't actually know if they should do more for seniors. And when they do get data, like the CMHC data showing that their housing strategy is letting seniors fall through the cracks, they ignore that data. So how can they preach to seniors and tell them that they're too wealthy to deserve more assistance? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, my friend across the way would be more credible if he hadn't systematically voted against all the support that we have chosen to implement during the pandemic and afterward to help our seniors, including the guaranteed income supplement increase. And yes, housing programs that will house more seniors in Quebec and throughout our country. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is not in a position to lecture us on the topic of supporting seniors. The Honourable Member. Well, I would choose to believe the Auditor General over the Minister, and the report shows that the federal government doesn't even know or have any evidence to show whether it's helping seniors. But they do seem to know that seniors are too wealthy to deserve a pension increase from 65 to 74 years of age, a 10% increase. They seem to know that, and that seniors are too wealthy to deserve a $250 check, which is somehow still being offered to people who earn $150,000 a year. Do they also know that seniors are totally fed up with their contemptuous behavior? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, we have committed to helping seniors, despite the headwinds that we're experiencing from the other side of the House, from the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois, who are time after time systematically voting against our supports to seniors. Just think of the dental plan. We offered that to help Canadians, but the Bloc Québécois systematically voted against it. Hundreds of thousands of Quebecers are benefiting from that plan, but the Bloc Québécois is against it. It is shocking.
L'honorable député de Rosemont.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, people are worried about their jobs. They don't have any idea whether they'll be able to pay for rent or groceries. And Donald Trump's tariffs will make that worse and make the prices of everything higher. Last week, the Prime Minister met with Trump, but other than a nice photo op, he came home empty-handed. At the very least, was he clear with the future American president that attacking Canadian and Quebec workers is unacceptable? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, my colleague is right. The tariffs that the Americans are considering will have extremely harmful effects on Canadian workers and the economy, but also harmful effects on the American economy and workers. And with that in mind, our delegation spoke with President-elect Trump and his future secretaries about the integration of our two economies We spoke about our border security, of course. It was a positive discussion, and I believe that we will be able to continue working with President-elect Trump.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are worried about their jobs and whether they can afford to put food on the table. Donald Trump's unfair tariffs will threaten those jobs and jack up prices for Canadians. Last week, the Prime Minister met with him, but he has nothing to show for it, and he came back empty-handed. Canadian workers want to know, did the Prime Minister make it clear to Donald Trump that balancing the U.S. budget on the backs of Canadian workers won't work for Canada?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want to disagree with my friend from Edmonton-Griesbach, but the idea that we came back empty-handed is completely false. He knows very well that we had a productive discussion with Mr. Trump and his future cabinet secretaries. The Prime Minister, of course, spoke about the importance of protecting the Canadian economy and Canadian workers from tariffs, but we also discussed with our American friends the negative impact that those tariffs could have on their economy, on an affordability in the United States as well. And Mr. Speaker, I think the commitment from President Trump to continue to work with us was far from empty-handed.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
A few short years, the Prime Minister has lost control of the deficit of immigration and of our border. He gave us a 2,500% increase in the number of unprocessed refugee claims, and he still thinks that 3 million temporary residents are going to leave this country voluntarily. Canada is staring down the barrel at 25% tariffs thanks to his open border policies, his free drugs for everyone plan, and his economic vandalism. The Prime Minister can mitigate that all today. Where's the Canada First plan to keep our borders safe? Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees.
Mr. Speaker, these people just aren't serious. She supports the leader of the opposition who sat idly by.
Mark, come on. You gotta do a little better than that, buddy.
Enforcement at the Canada-U.S. borders, cut at the immigration refugee border. And for those of them that are saying this is ancient history, we proposed an asylum reform package in May, and you know what the Conservatives did and the clapping seals in the back did at the Finance Committee? They voted against it and voted it down. They can support us in our asylum reform if they so choose. I encourage them to do so.
Why don't you support the people that live here right now instead of just bringing a bunch of people into asylum and then trying to, I don't know, whatever the hell you do with those people.
They knew for years that asylum claims were out of control, and they knew for years that our border was broken. None of what newly elected President Trump has been campaigning on was a secret, and the Prime Minister even threw that minister under the bus for his incompetence in immigration. If we're going to save Canadian jobs, we need a plan yesterday to fix the disorder at the border. So I'll ask again, where is the Canada First plan to keep our border safe?
Here, here.
They don't have one.
Citizenship, refugees, and immigration.
Mr. Speaker, this is from the gleeful authors of the Barbaric Practices Snitch Line. That was their approach to immigration when they last had a chance. We have been very serious with President Trump about our intention to secure the border. It is something that we clearly intend to do. They have an opportunity to do a number of things
that you intend to do. You've had 10 years to do it.
Right on. The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal government has broken our borders. They brought in 3 million temporary residents that need to leave Canada in the next year. But they have no way to know if they will actually leave. Will they go back home? Will they stay here illegally? Will they cross over the U.S. border? And by the way, the President-elect has made it very clear that there are no more free rides for our broken borders. The bottom line is, these Liberals don't know. Mr. Speaker, we need a Canadian plan, for Canada First plan, to fix our broken borders. Where is it?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, one of the first things in our plan was to reverse some of the draconian cuts that the previous Conservative government made to the brave women and men who work in Canadian Border Services.
we take the issue of border integrity and border security seriously, as do the Americans. Our discussion on Friday evening with our American friends, Mr. Speaker, was very much about the joint work that we could continue to do together. That work has been done for decades between Canadian and American law enforcement. It has kept both countries safe and secure, and we're prepared to continue to do more as well.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister went to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring and returned with absolutely nothing. All while there's serious gaps in our immigration system. For example, there are over 260,000 unprocessed refugee claims right now in the system. The Liberals are paying out billions of dollars every year for hotels, food, and medical costs for these claimants. They're even allowed to work while they wait nearly 4 years to be processed. Why would people leave Canada voluntarily when they can hitch themselves to this NDP Liberal gravy train? Mr. Speaker, where is the Canada First plan to keep our borders secure?
Before I recognize the Honourable Minister, I just want to encourage all members on all sides of the House, please, out of respect for those who do depend on simultaneous translation, please allow them to hear the questions and the answers which are given in the House by not taking the floor when you're not recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Minister for Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees.
While the Leader of the Opposition was in his basement figuring out what rhyme to put up on Twitter to express his displeasure with the government, the Prime Minister of Canada was meeting with Donald Trump, our most important partner. That is responsible. At the same time, when he's not doing that in his basement, Mr. Speaker, he's skipping around the Greater Toronto Area, promising everyone and anyone visas to this country and not to deport them. That is not responsible. That's not serious. We plan to be serious.
Again, I'm going to ask all members to...
If you call the past 10 years serious, then I think there's a real big issue.
New Brunswick Southwest to please not do so. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, for 9 years, we've been asking this Prime Minister to wake up and take back control of our borders. But he's doing the exact opposite. For example, in 2015, unprocessed asylum claims were less than 10,000, but today it's gone up to 260,000 cases. We have asked him for more surveillance at our borders, to cooperate more with provincial police forces, and to fight human trafficking, illegal entry, and drugs trafficking, among other problems. We have proposed a plan. Will he implement it? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, once again, on Friday, we had very cordial and constructive discussions with our American partners. We discussed border security at our shared border. We talked about integrating our law enforcement agencies with our American partners. We spoke about the important work that the RCMP is doing to fight fentanyl trafficking, drug seizures, and other operations, again, often in cooperation with our American allies. That's work that we will continue doing to support Canadian safety. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, President Trump has just asked the Prime Minister to do something just now, but we've been asking for that for 9 years. We've been asking for more measures to end weapons and drugs trafficking and auto theft, but he ignores us. Weapons trafficking and auto theft are a huge problem in Quebec. We have proposed increased measures at the Port of Montreal and at the border, but nothing is changing. We have a plan. Will the Prime Minister implement it? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, our colleague across the way has a whole list of things that actually our government has accomplished. We have worked with the police services. We have done everything we could to reverse the cuts of the former Conservative government. If my colleague was really serious about national security, then I would encourage him to tell his boss to get his essential security clearance so he can actually get information to protect his own political party and his caucus. For example, Mr. Speaker, about...
How the hell did he just tie in cuts from the previous government to this current government getting the clearance? God, they're fucking just weird. They're so weird.
Mr. Speaker, We've had ArriveCan, and now the AG has told us about a new subcontracting scandal, the Accenture scandal. Ottawa gave $313 million to this multinational company in order to take care of implementing the CEBA business loan program during the pandemic. That's more than 5 times the cost of ArriveCan. But just like for ArriveCan, this money was granted without a bid for tender, without a spending cap, and with no kind of follow-up check. The AG says that no department took on responsibility for the program. Mr. Speaker, are the Liberals allergic to accountability? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Mr. Speaker, quite the contrary. We care about accountability, and that is why we would like to thank the AG for her hard work. Her work is rigorous and important to raise again today. And what's also important to underscore is that during the pandemic, the only thing the Conservatives wanted to do, according to their leader, was to reduce taxes for the biggest, richest businesses so that hopefully those businesses would hire the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who were losing their jobs. These kinds of measures would have led to bankruptcy for thousands of SMEs throughout the country. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, nobody knows how Accenture managed to spend our $313 million, and the Liberals are refusing to tell us. The Department of Finance refused the AG's recommendation to look into the accountability gaps. They're washing their hands of the problem. This is a really low bar for accountability. With $313 million spent with no bid for tender or follow-up, the least the government could do would be to accept the AG's recommendations. If the Finance Department is refusing to look into this, I have to wonder if it's because they're worried that Quebecers will learn that they've been duped once again. The Honourable Parliament.
Only Quebecers have been duped. Yeah, okay.
The emergency business account helped innumerable businesses in Quebec and elsewhere and kept them from having to turn to bankruptcy. The emergency account enabled employees to keep getting a paycheck. 4 years later, the Bloc Québécois is getting up to complain about this. Maybe they want to change the channel because last week they voted against a tax rebate. Mr. Speaker, it's hard to believe the Bloc Québécois is voting against measures that would make the lives of Canadians easier, especially during the holiday period.
I don't think it really would. I really don't think it would.
The Honourable Member for Talbot. Well, let's focus here. The CEO of Export Development Canada revealed at the Public Accounts Committee that $149 million were granted to Accenture. But today we've heard from the AG that actually the number was $313 million. That's more than double. So how did we get to $313 million? Well, no one wants to tell us. The department is refusing to look into it. It's shocking. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers are paying their taxes with the hope and expectation that the money will be invested intelligently, and now they can only conclude that the Liberals are once again abusing their trust.
Did she just say that oh my God, my brain's hurting. Why would she think that the Liberals would invest their money accurately or in a way that would actually help anything with all the scandals that have happened under their government? Why would she believe that?
Promoted policy.
Oh my God, the Bloc. The Bloc actually, sometimes, I wonder why they are even there.
We did help them. Small businesses know that we will always be there to stand up for them.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, for 8 consecutive years, food bank usage has risen in Ontario, a timeline that matches the corruption and incompetence of the NDP Liberal government. They caused the cost of living crisis, a crisis where even 25% of Ontarians who have jobs need to use the food bank. Canadians deserve relief from this cost of living crisis. So will the Prime Minister cancel his plans to quadruple the carbon tax and call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Youth.
Well, great news, Mr. Speaker. Last week I was in PEI where we announced another province that has signed on to the National School Food Program. That's 184,000 kids kids this school year that will receive food at school. Almost 1.5 million more meals at school, Mr. Speaker, for a program that the Leader of the Opposition contends doesn't exist. I challenge him to ask those 184 children who are getting food at school. They'll school him.
You are the reason those kids are going to school hungry in the first place. And then when you enact a program that helps those starving kids, you sit there and you pat yourself on the back while everything continues to go up in price. This government is wild.
Still can't do basic math. They still don't understand that if you tax the farmer who grows the food and tax the trucker who ships the food, you're taxing the families who then buy the food. So this Prime Minister has completely lost touch with reality. So will he take a walk in the snow and call a carbon tax election now?
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative members of Parliament are so ridiculous. They had an opportunity.
Oh, quiet,
today
UPS driver, Karina.
Of the confidence in the government, and they decided not to, Mr. Speaker. So yet again, we see Conservative MPs talking out of one side of their mouth, but when it comes time to acting, they just can't deliver. Mr. Speaker, we are here to work for Canadians, and we're doing real things that are delivering for real Canadians, like school food programs, like the Canada Child Benefit, like dental care, that are helping Canadians make ends meet while all they do is puff hot air. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, while the Liberals try to distract Canadians with tax tricks on Christmas trees and alcohol, more than 1 million Ontarians turn to the food bank to feed themselves. Food bank use has risen in 8 of the 9 years this NDP Liberal government has been in power. In the last 2 years alone, food bank usage in Ontario has risen by 73%. Wow. Worse, almost 25% of those food bank users had jobs, providing more evidence that the Prime Minister's cost of living crisis is deepening. Canadians have had enough, Speaker. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing? Call a carbon tax election right now.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Giving a tax break to Canadians is real, Mr. Speaker. When you go to the cash, when you're trying to buy your kids Christmas presents, you're not going to pay GST. When you go to cash at the grocery store, you're not going to pay GST on everyday items, Mr. Speaker. When you go to the restaurant, either. This is real money back in the pockets of Canadians. The Conservatives talk about vulnerable Canadians who are having a rough time. They vote against support for Canadians on every single occasion. They stand up in this House and oppose a tax break. They're opposing a tax cut, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party of Canada, they've lost all sense.
Huh?
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
It's unacceptable that 1 in 5 emergency rooms in Ontario had unplanned shutdowns this year. The Prime Minister's praise of Doug Ford's innovation in healthcare resulted in 2024 being the worst year for emergency room closures in Ontario. The Liberals have given Ford billions of dollars in no-strings-attached healthcare funds, only for more closures and uncertainty. Ontarians deserve better. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for funding Doug Ford's privatization scheme, or will he continue to leave Ontarians waiting?
The Honourable Minister for Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, those agreements that were $200 billion over 10 years absolutely did come with common indicators and shared priorities. In fact, we just saw Kai Hai's report showing for the first time in Canadian history actually in data where we are. And what that data shows us is that nearly every jurisdiction across the country has more doctors, more nurses, that surgical wait times are back to where they were at the before the pandemic, and that we're making really important progress. It's essential that provinces step up and do their part, but we're making really important progress in our health system.
Are we, though? Are we really making massive improvements? Like, should we really be taking medical advice from the people that claim injection sites are safe?
stolen cars and guns. The Conservative leader fired over 1,100 border officers when he was in cabinet, including sniffer dogs and frontline staff, and the Liberals never hired them back. New Democrats have been calling on the government for years to invest more in CBSA frontline workers. Will the Liberals stop letting people down and hire back the officers the Conservatives fired and give them the tools they need to do their job?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our colleague from Windsor West for that question and share his support for the extraordinary women and men that work for the Canadian Border Services Agency. Like him, I've had an opportunity to meet many of these women and men who serve in the security of our country and do very important work. I was glad he highlighted the draconian cuts that the previous Conservative government made to the Border Services Agency. I'm happy to tell him, Mr. Speaker, that we have reversed those cuts. We've hired considerably more Border Services officers. And the good news, Mr. Speaker, is we're going to continue to do more as well.
That's right.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has built its reputation on bashing taxes, and yet when this government puts forward the tax break that will benefit all Canadians, he says no. Can the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development explain why this GST tax break for Canadians is so important and why the Conservative leader and his party would vote against a tax break that helps everyday people? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
This tax break is exactly the kind of relief that Canadians need right now. The Conservative leader contends to be a champion of taxpayers, but when given the opportunity to axe a tax, not this one, Mr. Speaker. Conservative MPs are turning their back on Canadians. While they may prefer slogans over solutions, on this side we'll continue to deliver for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians are worse off. The U.S. GDP is up 2.8%, while the Canadian GDP is only up 1%. The Canadian GDP per capita is down 0.4%. This is the 6th consecutive quarter in which the Canadian GDP has been down. This Prime Minister does not have a plan. So will he step aside for a Prime Minister who does?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of, to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
I think that member is misreading the numbers. Actually, Statistics Canada just revealed that they needed to revise the GDP numbers upwards for the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Canada is expected to have the highest GDP growth in all of the G7 next year, Mr. Speaker. I think what the Conservatives are trying to do is to change the channel. You see, just a few days ago, they opposed a tax break, Mr. Speaker. They opposed cutting the GST from everyday goods for Canadians, and they don't know how to explain it.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, Canada faces yet another threat to its economy. The U.S. has threatened a 25% tariff on all goods exported from Canada. This greedy government has increased taxes with the carbon tax, housing taxes, increased capital gains taxes. Mr. Speaker, this is not just bad vibes. So will the Prime Minister admit that it's not bad vibes, but bad policy that forces Canadians to suffer?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Export Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the Prime Minister led a Canadian delegation to Florida to meet with President Trump. They had a productive discussion on border and economic security, including the impacts tariffs will have on both Canadian and American consumers. In 2018, it was this government that renegotiated NAFTA, which led to record trade just last year of $1.3 trillion, Mr. Speaker. As we have done through 3 American administrations, we will continue to stand up for Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, once again this morning we found out that yet another sawmill is closing. Rapide des Joachim sawmill in Pontiac is the latest to get a taste of the weakness of this Liberal government. 10% of the town's workforce will lose their jobs. The economic repercussions for the town will be catastrophic. The threat of becoming a ghost town hangs over the village, just as it did in Sacré-Cœur in my region with the Caribou Decree. Why didn't the Prime Minister come back from Mar-a-Lago with any gains for forestry workers?
Because he doesn't care.
National trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member through you for that very important question. Mr. Speaker, the softwood lumber industry is very important to our government. We know it represents thousands of jobs from British Columbia down to Quebec, down to Eastern Canada. We will always stand up for Canadian softwood lumber. We stood up for Canada when the U.S. imposed aluminum and steel tariffs on us. And what did the Conservatives? They asked us to capitulate and back down. We have a proven track record to negotiate good trade deals. We will always stand up for lumber workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafjord. Mr. Speaker, 23 workers have been laid off. And how many other indirect jobs depend on the factory in a village of just 188 residents? The threat of becoming a ghost town is very real. This is all because of the Liberal government's failure to reach an agreement on softwood lumber. This is the fourth sawmill in Quebec to announce its closure in just a few months. Our workers need a strong leader. When will we have an election so that we can elect the Conservative leader to be Prime Minister? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Coast Guard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're very disappointed that the American Department of Trade increased unfair, unjustified duties on Canadian softwood lumber. This is incredibly unfair, and it is harmful to both producers and consumers on both sides of the border. Canadian workers are being punished by unfair tariffs, and this will also harm American lumber companies. The United States Department has to find a good, lasting solution, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, last week, on behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I tabled a bill that, if passed, would contribute significantly to the fight against organized crime. Not only would our bill create a list of criminal organizations, but it would also hit the bullseye by requiring members of these organizations to prove that their assets are not proceeds of their criminal activities. This would effectively reverse the burden of proof. This would send a clear message to criminals, Mr. Speaker. Will the government take up our bill and start taking the fight against organized crime seriously? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate this question because it addresses a very serious matter. Organized crime has increased here in Canada. What we are experiencing is that we need...
And what have you done about that, Verani?
Through Budget 2024 and the 2023 Fall Economic Statement for funding of organized crime. We also took action on car theft by investing more at the borders, and so car thefts have decreased by 40% in Quebec. Those are the results that this side of the House is delivering. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, gang wars are on our streets. Gangs put bounties on journalists. They kill innocent people by setting fire to businesses. They even shoot each other in broad daylight. They even take each other out in federal prisons. And what's the government doing? Where is the government? The government is doing nothing, and it is nowhere. The Liberals could send a strong message to gangsters and pass our bill, but no. While they're dilly-dallying, the gangs continue to lay down the law and bring their wars to our streets. When will the government start taking the fight against organized crime seriously? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. When we have conferences and meetings with our counterparts, including Ministers Bonnardel and Jolin Barrette, we talk about investments. We have invested $132 million in our Guns and Gangs initiative, which especially helps Quebec. We also invested $42 million to make our communities safer. Through our investments, we have made significant efforts, and we have succeeded in reducing organized crime-related incidents such as car thefts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I agree with the NDP leader who said the Liberal government will always step in to make sure unions have no power. The minister's Section 107 referrals took away workers' rights to strike. As a result of this, Conservatives believe that this Liberal government has lost the confidence of the House of Commons. Now, this puts the NDP and the NDP leader in a tough spot. Will he support his own words, support workers, or continue to prop up this NDP Liberal government, or will the government throw their coalition buddy a line and call a carbon tax election?
Order. Order. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, you would think this was not from the party that supported the anti-union oppressive Bill C-377 and Bill C-525. You would think this wasn't from the party who has in its own policy handbook the fact that they will be bringing in right-to-work Alabama-style legislation into this House. You would think that that wasn't the party that refused to debate that very motion this morning in this House of Commons.
Order. The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
So his defense of his decision to take away a worker's right to strike is to talk about some things from a few years ago. Unions have unilaterally condemned the Section 107 referrals, and the NDP leader said he intervenes to take away unions' power. That's true. He took away the Teamsters' right to strike. He took away the ILWU's 514's right to strike. But when Unifor 1541 asked him to intervene to prevent union busting, this minister disappears. But the leader of the NDP has a choice to make. Will they keep propping up these guys that make these anti-worker decisions, or will they just stand with his words and vote against?
I'm going to ask all members, please, to remind themselves that they have to keep their voices down so that those who participate using translation can hear the interpretation. The Honourable Minister of Labour and for Seniors.
You would think that wasn't the party that opposed 10 sick days for employees in federally regulated industries. You would think that that was a party that didn't have right-to-work Mississippi-style legislation in its policy platform. You would think that wasn't the party whose very leader decried the involvement of unions in the procurement and other processes. Mr. Speaker, this Conservative Party is anti-worker. They've proved it on every single occasion that they're able to do it, and we will always stand for workers in this country.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
Today, the truth will be revealed. The Conservatives have put forward a non-confidence motion using the quote from the NDP leader where he said the Prime Minister is greedy and anti-worker. So what will it be? Will the leader of the NDP sell out Canadians yet again, or has that Prime Minister made another backroom deal that puts both of their lust for power over the rights of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Seniors and for Labour.
I guess that member's back from announcing the housing projects in her riding that she voted against in this House of Commons. It is a joke, Mr. Speaker. It is a sick joke to watch these Conservatives line up behind this leader and his fake, false bravado, putting motions on the floor of this House. Then we ask them to debate those very motions. What do they say? No, Mr. Speaker. They refuse to debate their own motion. They will not debate help for Canadians. They will not debate tax cuts. They will not debate any support for Canadians in this House of Commons. This is a sick joke.
Oh, he's getting red. He was getting red there. Take a breath. Breathe. Please.
Order.
Oh my goodness, he just muted it. Darth Fungus has muted the House of Commons, ladies and gentlemen.
S'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Emperor Fungus.
L'honorable député de Châteauguay-Lac.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, the global pandemic made things difficult for the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, and many of our retailers and restaurants too. Through programs like the Canada Emergency Business Account, our government stepped up to help businesses through that difficult time. Now, my constituents want to know what we're doing to help them post-recovery. Can the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change tell us about the government's plan? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. I thank my colleague for her question. We're always there for Canadian families and Canadian businesses in good times and in bad times. Twice, though, we proposed tax cuts for the middle class, and on both occasions, the Conservative leader voted against the tax cuts and forced his party to join him in doing so. Today, with our GST cut, we are providing even more support for families and businesses. You'd think that the Conservatives would support this, but the only tax cuts they seem to support are for their rich friends and for big oil companies. It's always the same old story for the Conservative Party. Their interests and their friends' interests first, the interests of Canadians second.
For Calgary Forest Lawn.
The Auditor General exposed $3.5 billion for ineligible CEBA loans thanks to this incompetent Liberal NDP government. They were too incompetent to run this program themselves, so they gave a sole source contract to Accenture, a multinational corporation that gave most of the work to Brazilians, not Canadians. Canadians got taken to the cleaners for more than $300 million. Why are third-party contractors running this government and covering up ministers' incompetence?
And giving money to a country that has a legitimate dictatorship. Brazil is an actual dictatorship.
Opposition can read without a security clearance. The member opposite and his party claim every single time that they care about small businesses, when in fact every single time we put efforts and support forward for small businesses, they always vote against it and decline everything that we do. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the CEBA loans were there and helped nearly 900,000 small businesses keep their lights on, keep their doors open, and keep their employees working. We will continue to be there to support small business, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mission Mashpee Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, today the Auditor General released a bombshell report on the Canada Emergency Business Account. It highlights serious inefficiencies, a lack of government oversight, and $3.5 billion in losses to ineligible recipients. So how did we get here? The report outlined that the third-party program administrator, Accenture, set their own pricing, wrote their own contracts, ran procurement, and received 19 uncompetitive contracts for $313 million. Why can't the Liberals administer a government program without breaking a conflict of interest law?
Canada needs Doge. That is $3.5 billion that was misallocated and wrongfully handled.
That they don't need security clearance for. So here's the real bombshell, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to security clearance, there are more allegations that have come forward with regards to foreign interference in the Conservative leadership party race. Yet the Conservative leader chooses to ignore these security breaches in his own party. If the Conservative leader actually cared, he'd have nothing to hide. So, Mr. Speaker, can the leader of the Conservative Party get the clearance, take the briefing, and protect this country?
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General came down hard on Liberal corruption this morning. She revealed that $3.5 billion from the Canada Emergency Business Account was paid to companies that were ineligible. Worse yet, as in this case of the ArriveCan scandal, it was a private company, in this case Accenture, which established the criteria and costs of its own contract with the government. Mr. Speaker, why are the Ministers of Finance and Foreign Affairs continuing to illegally reward a private company at the expense of Canada's hard-hit small and medium enterprises?
Yeah, you notice the same thing over and over again with the Liberals. They just keep asking for Pierre to get his clearance, and they don't mention or talk about anything else with that issue, almost as if they've been silenced in diving further into that topic. I wonder why that is. It's like they got their security clearance and were probably forced to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, making them, I don't know, not allowed to speak about those things. So they continue to repeat over and over again. Pierre, get your clearance. Pierre, get your clearance. You're not helping Canadians. Get your clearance. It's kind of weird how that works, isn't it?
Here to ensure that businesses can pay their employees, pay their expenses, and that they were able to remain resilient throughout the most significant pandemic in history.
Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the midst of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This campaign unites people across the country and the world to call out and speak up against acts of gender-based violence. Unlike the Conservative Party, our government has never wavered in supporting survivors of gender-based violence or investing in prevention. Could the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth update the House on our government's
The Honourable Minister.
Our theme, Come Together, Act Now, Mr. Speaker, emphasizes that everyone plays a part, especially men and boys, to change attitudes and behaviors that contribute to gender-based violence. And this dangerous behavior is pervasive. Even the leader of the Conservative Party embedded misogynistic hashtags in his YouTube videos. Canadian women remember, Mr. Speaker. Our government won't ever back down on supporting survivors. We created the first national action plan to end gender-based violence, backed by more than $500 million. We will not relent until every woman is safe.
Hashtag me too.
First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples continue to be killed by the RCMP. In less than a month, 9 Indigenous peoples were killed without consequence. The RCMP and provincial authorities must respond towards reconciliation. Indigenous peoples deserve justice. Victims and their families deserve justice. When will this government finally work with Indigenous peoples and law enforcement towards Indigenous justice?
You're here. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we thank our colleague for that important question and obviously share her concern and the concern of all Canadians when we see these tragic outcomes. I've talked to the RCMP, the Commissioner, the leadership of the RCMP about this. I've had a chance to talk to Indigenous leaders and territorial premiers about this. We share our colleagues' concern about moving towards a circumstance where we can have more Indigenous police forces and include Indigenous communities in the important law enforcement that Canadians expect in their communities and that we want to do in partnership with them. And we'll continue to do that important work, Mr. Speaker, and think of the families of these victims at all times.
The Honourable Member for Spadina Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's border and immigration are key issues for the incoming Trump
Kevin!
It's no surprise the immigration minister was left out of the Prime Minister's Mar-a-Lago visit, given that it's his failures that have now placed our economy at risk. With IRGC agents hiding behind the refugee program to avoid deportation, can the public safety minister, who did make the trip and whose department finally got around to designating the IRGC as a terrorist that they are, share what he's doing to kick out every single terrorist from Canada? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we see a member of the House constantly making things up. We are very
Oh, shut up, Mark.
any foreign agent working in Canada, whether it's as part of any purported terror. The enforcement agencies in our country work diligently to clamp down on these people, to arrest them, to bring them to justice, or to kick them out of the country. We'll continue to do so. Thank you.
The fucking Ozempic Mark over here. Guy looking like Skeletor in The Second Coming.
I would like to highlight
the presence of a former colleague, the Honourable Jean-Claude Damour, former Minister of Government Affairs, Minister for Immigration and Minister for Military Affairs for the province of New Brunswick.
I see that there are 2 points of order which are going to be...
Oh, points of order. Here we go.
Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising to add my perspective on the matter of privilege raised on Friday by my colleague, the member for London Frencha. Specifically, the opposition Deputy House Leader explicitly named me and put completely false information on the record regarding my conduct in the lobby as an attempt to deflect from the deliberate, premeditated plan to disrupt the voting proceedings in the House.
What?
And so I'm rising to state this, to correct the record and put on the record what had actually happened. Prior to the vote taking place, on my way to the washroom, I overheard the Conservative lobby staff instruct Conservative MPs to disrupt proceedings in the chamber once the NDP rose to vote. He then egged them on and said, quote, "The NDP deserves it." I shook my head and made a comment under my breath and left the lobby. Not only was there no intimidation, there was no heated exchange of words between me and that staffer. In other words, the Conservative staff is suggesting that the NDP deserves to have our House privilege violated in clear contravention of Section 16(1) of the Standing Orders. When the vote took place, sure enough, the Conservatives carry out their premeditated plan to deliberately violate the privilege of NDP members. During the vote, I was not able to hear if my vote was registered, and I did not know if, in fact, it had or not. I stood for some time watching and waited. After the vote, a number of MPs and staff had gathered, and I reiterated that the staffer in question...
During the voting period, you're supposed to stand there. They call out your name. You continue to stand there to confirm the fact that they have called your name, and then you sit down after you have acknowledged the fact that they have confirmed your name. What is she going on about? Plus, there's an electronic voting period where they confirm each and every single individual in the House based on how they voted. What does this point of order have to do with literally anything other than the fact that she just wants to bitch and complain?
...is not subject to debate in the House, but the member from Megantic-Larab brought this up, and I need to defend myself and put the truth on the record. The member's fabrication does not end there. In his comment, he says
the conspiracy goes deeper.
Had to, quote, physically take hold of me. Not only is this absolutely untrue, when I returned from the washroom and walked through the lobby, I was not manhandled by anyone.
Whoa.
On the contrary, I proactively informed what I had overheard.
She got woman-handled instead.
Who was already aware at the time that the Conservatives intended to violate Standing Order 16(1) by disrupting the House when the NDP got up to vote. This was reported to the clerk, and so that the Speaker would be informed.
she got Randy handled.
So deeply disturbing for the Conservatives to resort to fabricating such a story to malign me and the NDP hard-working.
This is just wild that she would go on to say that some sort of physical whatever violence or assault or manhandling or however she wants to describe it happened. I don't know. I don't know if I entirely believe that.
Corruption of Section 16(1) of the Standing Orders brought on by the Conservative MPs on Thursday, Mr. Speaker. The truth needs to be told, and I hope that this information will assist you in that deliberation.
Thank I thank the honourable member from Vancouver East. Je reconnais, c'est le rappel.
Point of order. The second person on the list was the
Yeah, that's a good point as well. There should be cameras all over the place.
not on the same topic, but I'll still go ahead with my point of order. One of your responsibilities is to maintain order in this house. I know it's not always easy, especially at this time. I know our friends at the NDP are very far away from you, but they're very near us, and they're often very noisy, and it's hard to hear interpretation, and it is also disruptive for us. So I hope that in future you will be able to pay greater attention to what's happening in this corner of the house, because it's really hard for us.
Je remercie l'honorable député de La Prairie pour son intervention.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his intervention. Third point of order.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to reserve the right to come back to this question with a more comprehensive response, but I couldn't help but stand up and respond to a few of the erroneous points that the NDP member just raised. And I want to thank my colleague from the Bloc Québécois to point out that the NDP are often selective in their sanctimony about decorum in this place. They are often extremely noisy, heckle members when they have the floor, including during votes, Mr. Speaker. So they suddenly find their holier-than-thou-ness genes on this type of thing when they themselves are guilty of it often. With regards to the specific allegations, I can tell the NDP member that there are witnesses that saw everything that our colleagues have pointed out, including we have videotape of the erratic and unhinged behavior that the NDP members exhibited when they marched up to the Speaker's chair. She wants to talk about decorum. Marching up to the Speaker's chair, hurling insults at the Speaker after the House had already been adjourned, to the point where they did have to be taken aback because they were violating the space of members of our side who mostly were seated and calm and collected. And I don't know what happened to cause such erratic and unhinged behavior in the part of the NDP. I won't speculate to that, but I will be coming back with a more substantive response, including the eyewitness testimony of members who were in the lobby who heard that member hurl abuse and profane and vulgar language at a staffer. So an elected MP yelling insults and using profane language against the staffer would also rise to the level of unparliamentary behavior. As she pointed out, it happened in the lobby, not in the chamber. But I would just point out that it's your job, Mr. Speaker, to enforce decorum during votes and during speeches, which you did that night. You made a judgment call on aspects of decorum that evening. And other than that, I believe that's where the matter should rest. And it was only after the NDP started making false and defamatory accusations, which I dare say they would never repeat outside the chamber, that we were forced to show Canadians the actual truth about what happened that evening, which consisted of NDP members of Parliament completely losing their cool, coming over in an aggressive and hostile manner, hurling abuse and yelling at members who were seated and calm and collected. That is the true story about what happened that night, and we will absolutely correct the record.
I see that the honourable member from Niagara Centre is rising, Niagara Falls rather, is rising on the same point of order. If I could ask the honourable member to be brief.
And I take no pleasure in standing here, and I'm just building on what our House Leader would have to say in the report that he will be coming back with on further comments. I was one of those witnesses that evening in the lobby, and you know I want to correct or bring a little clarification to what the member opposite said. Unfortunately, she used her position of power to bully a staffer and used inappropriate language when dealing with that one staffer. I immediately let the whip's office and our House Leader's office know, and it should not stand. You do not treat the people that serve us here in this House in that type of manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I hope to come back to the House as soon as possible after we've heard the interventions, which some have indicated that they're going to be coming back to the House with before the Speaker makes some observations. I wish to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset.
Alrighty.
I wish to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset.
Routine business. Tabling of documents.
Alrighty, tabling of documents is going to happen. Usually, point of order is a bit more crazy, or it can get crazy. I guess today was a little anticlimactic based on the accusations that were made. I would assume there will be a follow-up for this tomorrow. What a weird turn of events there at the end. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. Turn the notification bell on. If you haven't already, make sure you put it on all notifications so you get notified when I upload and go live. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. And I will be live tomorrow for question period again. Same time as always. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day or night depending on where you are. Take it easy, everyone.
I have the honor to present in both official languages the 19th report of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs.